And welcome back to Love Your Food. This week we have a sort of an old-fashioned and indigenous-inspired recipe. This is Three Sisters salad. Now the Three Sisters refers typically to beans, corn, and squash, although traditionally it would have been something more like zucchini. We're using butternut squash, but we'll start off and get going with our ingredients. So we're using black beans, just regular corn on the cob, some parsley, some butternut squash. We're going to be using some lemon juice, some red onion, some toasted pecans, and a little bit of olive oil. Now, this is adapted and is not completely traditional, but we are going to start off by, we soaked our beans for at least a couple of hours, and we're going to boil them for a while. We want to make sure these are cooked before we start using them. Always make sure your beans are properly cooked before you put them into a salad. Raw beans and beans that have been improperly cooked or improperly handled can definitely be a vector for foodborne illness, so you just want to make sure that you're always handling beans properly. So we're going to put this together on our induction burner and give it a cover, and we're going to just let that cook for a while. Meanwhile, we're going to get some of our other ingredients ready. Now we're going to roast the squash, so we're going to cut just the top and the bottom so we have something to sort of balance it on. And this is going to get cut in half. Now, like I said earlier, a more traditional thing would be to use something like zucchini in this salad, but any kind of squash works just fine for this. Now, the reason those three ingredients, the beans, the squash, and the corn, were typically grown together is that they all grow somewhat symbiotically. They work to help each other grow. And pecans was also often included in indigenous communities closer to the southern United States. So while we're getting the squash ready on one hand, we're just going to keep an eye on the beans, make sure they're not sticking, make sure the water level is still appropriate, and we just want it to simmer. Meanwhile, we're going to peel the squash. Now, butternut squash like this has very thick skin, so it's a little easier, honestly, to do this with a knife. If you're going to use a peeler for this, you probably want to go through it twice because the skin is so thick and tough. You want to make sure you get rid of any traces of green because it doesn't taste very good. And then we're going to cut this into panels or sticks, and then we're going to dice this before we roast it, just to make it go a little bit quicker. Now, if you have more squash, and usually one squash is going to be much bigger than you need for one salad. Once this is roasted, you can always freeze these, the roasted squares of squash, and use them in other recipes. They go well in soup. They go well in other salads. You can garnish other things with them. They're delicious. We're also going to season them a little bit. We don't want them to lose all their moisture, so we're going to give them a light coating with the olive oil. Give them a little coating in that. Shake it in the bowl. And also a little bit of salt and pepper. So you want to make sure you give them a good amount of salt. They are fairly starchy, so you do want to give them a fair amount of salt. And like I said, any kind of squash works well for this. You can use kabocha. Acorn squash would be fine for this. Zucchini is more traditional, but any of those will be delicious in this recipe. And we're just going to give that a little toss, make sure everything's well seasoned. All of the pieces of squash have a good coating of that olive oil. We're going to put this onto a baking sheet and into our preheated oven. Now all the temperatures, times, and ingredient amounts are going to be in the description below. So this is going to go into the oven, and we're just going to let that roast while the beans are still cooking. And at this point, you can just sort of sit back for a little while. You do want to get your corn ready as well. Now, we wanted to get that kind of roasted or grilled corn aroma. Now, we can't really grill right now. It's the middle of winter here, and we don't have a grill set up for that. But you can sort of fake it a little bit. We're going to use the cast iron for this. So we've got a little bit of our favorite neutral oil in the cast iron. And as long as you use a vegetable-based oil for this recipe is vegan. There's no animal ingredients of any kind. If you want to garnish it with a little bit of cheese, that keeps it lacto-ovo. But there's no meat products or anything in this. So we're just going to let the corn cook a little bit in the cast iron. We want it to get a little bit of color. Again, we want that sort of grilled or charred flavor for the or roasted flavor for the corn. And we're just going to let that roast for a little while in the cast iron. You can see it's already picked up a little bit of color. And once you've got that kind of toasty, roasted corn aroma, we're going to take that off the heat and let it cool off in a metal bowl here. So we want to make sure that we're not cooking it too much. We don't want it to get mushy, but we do want that nice toasty aroma and flavor to that. That's going to go in this bowl, and it's just going to chill out for a little while and cool. We want it to be basically room temperature when we start working with it. Same with the squash. So this is just about ready. We don't want a whole lot of color on the squash, and we don't want to overcook it. Same with the beans. We don't want to overcook our beans, or else they will just turn to mush. Now, we're not using all of these beans in our salad today, so we're just taking a cup of them out. We're going to strain those. The rest of those you can freeze, keep in the fridge, however you want to keep those. And they will be useful in other things as well. You can use those in soup or in sauces as well. So here's our corn that has cooled down some. We rinsed our beans, as you can see, in some cold water. So those have cooled down as well. And then we're going to add our squash and let those cool down on the other side of the bowl. And then once those get, pretty close back down to room temperature, it's time for us to work on our dressing. Now, I did forget the apple cider vinegar at the top of the at the top of the video. So this is going to mix with our olive oil. So we're going to start with a little bit of that apple cider vinegar. And then a little bit of salt as well. We want to dissolve some salt in there just for seasoning. You want to make sure that some of that is getting dissolved. And then from there, we're going to add in our olive oil. And you want to give that a good stir. You want to sort of emulsify those two together, the oil and the vinegar. And a fork is ideal for this. You can see there, we've got it pretty decently there. And then we're just going to set that aside and get our onion ready. Now we want this little bit of sharpness from the onion because all of the other flavors in there, the beans, the corn, and the squash are all very round kind of umami flavors. This will give just that little bit of hot sharpness to the salad and a little bit of crunch as well. And we want pretty small pieces. We don't want like big chunks of onion, so we're going to try and dice this pretty small. You don't have to be super accurate about it or anything like that, but we do want it fairly small for this recipe. So that's going to go into the bowl with all of our other ingredients. And then we're going to put in our dressing. And that's just going to soak into all those ingredients. It's going to sort of bind everything together. And you want to try and stir this as little as possible. The squash has been cooked and it will sort of fall apart a little bit. So you want to sort of keep everything in one piece as much as you can. So we're trying to stir this as little as possible, just until it's combined. Next, we're going to get our parsley ready. So we're just going to give that a nice chop. And you do kind of want that to be in fairly small pieces as well, like the onion. So give that a nice chop until it's pretty fine, and then that's just going to go into our salad as well. And that's all of our major ingredients at this point. From here, it's just going to be a matter of sort of adjusting flavors to make sure that everything's balanced and you've got all of the things that you want in there. So once you've got all of your major ingredients in there and it's sort of at the level you like, now's the time to give it a taste and see what sort of flavors need adjusting. So we're just going to give that a little sample. And if you feel like it needs a little bit more salt, a little bit more pepper, this is the time to add that. We're actually going to add a little bit of hot sauce. We made some pepper sauce out of our calamondins. So we're going to add a little bit of that for a little bit of acidic zing and a little bit of heat. Now we're certainly getting further and further away from traditional ingredients. You're not going to find a whole lot of lemons in indigenous North American cuisine. But a little bit of acid is really sort of brings everything alive. Adding some salt here and a little bit of black pepper again. And then we're going to finally adjust with a little bit of lemon juice. So we've got a half a lemon here. And we're just going to cut through those cells to sort of help get some of that juice out. We're just going to squeeze that lemon right into the salad. And again, all of these ingredients are pretty round, so it will take a fair amount of acid to keep that zing really flavorful and aromatic in the salad itself. So once you've adjusted all the flavors, we're going to give it one last little sample and then let it sit for a while. You want to let that sit for at least an hour or so for all of those flavors to sort of meld together. You can put it in the fridge and just let it sit for a while. And then you can serve it however you like. We've got it here on some green mix, some salad greens, and garnish with those nicely toasted pecans on top. Next week, we're going to show you a little bit more indigenous cooking, sort of traditional simple fry bread that we serve this with. And that's going to be bring these two together. So if you like this recipe, please do like and subscribe. And if you have any recipes you'd like to see Chef Caleb try on the channel, please let us know in the comments below. And remember to love your food.